People in this society, and probably some people in the room, have all kinds of ideas about communism. Maybe they even say, okay, I'm with you. This world is really fucked up. People suffer in all kinds of ways. There are all these outrages. But people say that communism has just been a horror, a disaster, that maybe it's a good idea on paper, but it has only been a nightmare in practice. And then they went on. To this, I have a few things to say. First, capitalism-imperialism is the real nightmare for humanity, and it's not even a good idea on paper.
Welcome to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. This is episode number 41 on the 25th day of February 2021. My name is Andy Z. I'm the host of the show. Welcome. What you just heard was Bob Avakian, BA, speaking in his film that's titled BA Speaks, Revolution Nothing Less, from which we take our name. And that little segment you just saw is from a clip from this film titled, Which System, Capitalism or Communism, is the Nightmare for Humanity? Now, the title of that segment and the humor and the seriousness of those few seconds should tell you something about the leadership that is presented on this show every week and is at the heart of the RNL show. That is Bob Avakian, BA, a revolutionary leader, someone who has not only never given up the dream of revolution, but over the decades has consistently gone to work to solve the biggest problems that faces humanity. How can the potential of humanity all over the world be realized? How can humanity be emancipated from millennia of servitude and oppression in one form or another? Bob Avakian is a leader, a revolutionary who came of age in the 1960s. When most others from that generation gave up or whittled down their aspirations to just eking out a little bit of space at the edges of this society, murderous system, BA went to work scientifically summing up that experience and scientifically summing up the experience of the emancipatory, liberatory first communist revolutions in the 20th centuries, learning from their great achievements as well as from their shortcomings, including those mistakes that still make us grieve today. BA has developed the road to how we could really win a revolution and what that revolution must be for. Even from the few seconds of this clip that we showed you at the top of the show, it reveals that Bob Avakian, BA, is someone who's going to talk straight to you. He is someone who, like we used to say back in the day, tells it like it is. And the substance and title of this film clip, once again, that opened our show, Which System, Capitalism or Communism, is the Nightmare for Humanity, also tells much about what we do every week on the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. We expose and we get under the hood of the problems we face in this capitalist imperialist system. And what is the actual solution to this in a real revolution to overthrow the system and bring about a radically new society, a new socialist economic system, a new form of government that would not only be a far better society in which humanity could flourish, but would put us on the road to go to work on the total and real emancipation of humanity all around the world. And we're going to bring you that full clip in a few minutes. But first, I want to welcome my co-host, Sunsara Taylor.
Andy, it's great to be here for episode 41. Looking forward to it.
Okay, well, the focus of our show today is going to be the New Year's statement from Bob Avakian, a new year, the urgent need for a radically new world for the emancipation of all humanity. And this is a statement that speaks to and it concentrates the moment that we face, the truly urgent and existential stakes facing humanity. And while there's no longer the Trump-Pence fascist regime in power in this country, we do face a country where 74 million people voted for this white supremacist, vile, misogynist, fascist with a aroused fascist base. You saw them there on January 6th, storming the Capitol building, and it's got followers through all levels of the government. BA says this. He says, the electoral defeat of the Trump-Pence regime only, quote, buys some time, both in relation to the imminent danger posed by fascism that this regime represents, and more fundamentally, in terms of the potentially existential crisis humanity is increasingly facing as a consequence of being bound to the dynamics of this system of capitalism, imperialism, end quote. This is from the New Year's statement. And this is a statement that brings a radically different approach and understanding and a way to act on the relations and problems of society and how they should be taken up, which is, and this is a major theme of this statement, a thoroughly and consistently scientific method and approach. So with that, why don't we talk with people about what we're going to be doing in this segment and how we're going to be bringing this statement alive in today's show.
So we're going to do two major segments today that really bring alive and hopefully drive you further back into this statement, this New Year's statement from Bob Avakian. We're going to be dealing with two major questions that he takes up. And the first is on the changed position of women in society and the need to take up the fight to break the chains on women as part of the revolution that needs to be made. And we're doing this both because it's important, it's a part of the statement, but also we're coming up very soon on International Women's Day, March 8th, which is a revolutionary holiday celebrated all around the world that is really a day for people to take up the fight to break all the chains that bind women. And the only way it can be done, which is as part of making an actual revolution to overthrow this system and emancipate all of humanity. So we're going to dig into that in a segment, the way that BA goes at this in his statement. Mm-hmm. And I want to say before announcing the other segment we're going to do, this is something that BA has emphasized over years. This question of breaking the chains on women is a dividing line among the oppressed themselves. It's a dividing line between wanting to really end all oppression and break free or wanting to get in on that oppression. And this is really important. So we're going to be dealing with this again this week and going forward. And the other major segment that we're going to do dealing with this statement is bringing alive this existential danger of the environmental destruction, which is really being accelerated under this system. And Avakian deals with this very, like you said, with a lot of science, how this is tied up with this system and what needs to be done about it. And so that'll be the final segment of our show. It'll be an illustrated segment. It's pretty vivid, and I think people will get a lot from it.
Yeah, so, this statement, an urgent need for a radically new world for the emancipation of all humanity, that's really a charge that's before us right now. And when I said that running through this statement is the method and approach of a consistently and thoroughly scientific way of looking at the world, of knowing the world, in order to be able to discover the pathways to change it, and that shall guide us before and after a revolution to change the world in the interest of all of humanity. This comprehends, as last week we went into this on the liberation and emancipation of the liberation of Black people and the emancipation of all humanity. Today we're going into it around women and the environment. This is a fully comprehensive revolution that's about a radically different way to think about the world and to change the world, and that will bring about a radically new world fit for humanity. This is a big deal. This is a really big deal. I've said that several times on this show over the last several weeks. But it really is when you think about all that we're facing right now. Just before we move to the film clip that we began the show with, the full clip, it's about 5 minutes. Before we move to that, I do want to say in this statement, Bob Avakian talks about the Constitution for a New Socialist Republic in North America that he wrote and what kind of society it will bring. I'm just going to read one line from that that'll give you a sense of how liberating and how important what we're talking about on this show is. He says that this new society, the new socialist republic, he says, will unchain, now I'm quoting, will unchain and unleash a tremendous productive and social force of human beings, enabled and inspired to work and struggle together to meet the fundamental needs of the people. transforming society in a fundamental way and supporting and aiding revolutionary struggle throughout the world, aiming for the final goal of a communist world, free from all exploitation and oppression, while at the same time addressing the truly existential environmental and ecological crisis in a meaningful and comprehensive way, which is impossible under the system of capitalism, imperialism, end quote. So throughout this show and in this next clip, I want you to keep thinking about that juxtaposition of what's not possible under this system and what this system does to people here and around the world and to the planet itself. And pose that against that we are bringing you someone and a way to get out of this madness, to bring about the kind of world I just spoke of and that he wrote of in this New Year's statement. So with that, let's go to this film clip, and I'm going to let it speak for itself.
So here is some of what this person raised in his feedback. They wrote, people in this society, and probably some people in the room, have all kinds of ideas about communism. Maybe they even say, okay, I'm with you. This world is really fucked up. People suffer in all kinds of ways. There are all these outrages. But people say that communism has just been a horror, a disaster, that maybe it's a good idea on paper, but it has only been a nightmare in practice. And then they went on. To this, I have a few things to say. First, capitalism-imperialism is the real nightmare for humanity, and it's not even a good idea on paper. Second, where does this idea come from that communism is a nightmare? It comes from the politicians who run this capitalist imperialist system, from the people who decide and control what is and is not taught in the schools, from the media mouthpieces of this system and this system's intellectual hitmen. In other words, from the very people who rule over and enforce this capitalist imperialist system and who have told lie after lie after lie to defend this system. These are the people you're going to trust to tell you about communism? And then they went on. All this would be bad enough. But then for the last few decades, even many progressive voices, including those who once knew better, have gotten bamboozled or bullied to the point where they no longer know and speak the truth about communism. And this creates a situation where everybody knows that communism is a nightmare, when in reality, very few people know anything about what communism actually is and what the actual experience of the communist revolution has been. So they go on, let's talk about that. And here, they say, are a few examples I thought of. The contrast between the 10 million children who die every year under this system from starvation and preventable disease, and the fact that in socialist China, they had solved the food problem so that everyone had enough to eat within 20 years. So remind me, which system is the nightmare for humanity? Or how about the contrast between the situation for women under this system, the millions who are raped and beaten every year, the extreme degradation and enslavement concentrated in pornography and sex trafficking, up against the unprecedented emancipatory advances for women during the first wave of communist revolution in Russia and China. Remind me again, which system is a nightmare for humanity? Or let's contrast the dominant art and culture of this society, real housewives of this or that, and the all too putrid culture that comes through in way too much of hip-hop and so-called stand-up comedy today, up against the revolutionary art and culture that was brought forward through the Cultural Revolution in China, and the prominent role of women and overcoming women's oppression in that art and culture. Remind me once more, which system is the nightmare for humanity? Or contrast the staggering mass incarceration, especially of oppressed nationalities in this country, up against the steps that were taken in Russia to overcome the oppression of minority nationalities. One more time, remind me which system is the nightmare for humanity?
March 8th is an internationalist and revolutionary holiday. It's International Women's Day. And this is a day for people all over the world to celebrate and dedicate ourselves to the fight to break all the chains, including the chains that bind the half of humanity that is female. Taking up this fight is a central part of any revolution worth making. And Bob Avakian has made the point for years that you cannot break all the chains except one. You cannot say you want to end exploitation and oppression, but keep the oppression of women by men. BA also dedicates significant attention to the question of the changed role of women in society and the urgent need to take up the fight to break these chains as part of the urgent fight for a radically different future in his New Year's statement. And so today and over the next several episodes, we want to dig into this question of the liberation of women and how it's bound up with the fight to make revolution to emancipate all of humanity in different dimensions. And we're going to start this today by looking at a key paragraph in BA's New Year's statement. And I think how we'll do this is Andy will read the paragraph, and then we're going to work our way through it and discuss it a bit.
Okay, Sunsara, this is a quote that Bob Avakian wrote 35 years ago, and it's incredibly prescient. It is even more relevant today than when it was written. Quote, over the past several decades in the U.S., there have been profound changes in the situation of women and the relations within the family. In only 1 of 10 families is there the model situation where the husband is the sole breadwinner and the wife a totally dependent homemaker. With these economic changes have come significant changes in attitudes and expectations, and very significant strains not only on the fabric of the family, but of social relations more broadly. The whole question of the position and role of women in society is more and more acutely posing itself in today's extreme circumstances. This is a powder keg in the U.S. today. It is not conceivable that all this will find any resolution other than in the most radical terms and through extremely violent means. The question yet to be determined is, will it be a radical reactionary or a radical revolutionary resolution? Will it mean reinforcing the chains of enslavement or the shattering of the most decisive links in those chains and the opening up of the possibility of realizing the complete elimination of all such forms of enslavement?
So there's a tremendous amount packed into that quote, and I think to just begin to take it apart, we should start with the first statement he makes about those profound changes in the situation of women and the relations in the family. And he, 35 years ago, he said it's only 1 in 10 families that are traditional anymore in the sense of a male sole breadwinner and a woman who stays home with the children. And these changes have become even more dramatic since then. It could be easy to take it for granted, especially if you're young and you come up and this is just, these changes are all you know, but it used to be unheard of to be able to turn on the TV and see a woman broadcaster, women sports figures, to go into court and be defended by a woman lawyer or have a woman judge, or to go on a college campus and have women professors, or now you have a situation where more women are graduating with 4-year degrees from college than men. These are really profound changes. And then at the bottom rungs of society economically, you have millions and millions of women, especially Black women and other women of color, who've been drawn into the workforce in retail and sales and service, even as huge sections of Black men are cast out of work altogether. So all these are major changes driven by the changing economy, but also coming together with social struggles that women have waged, fights for liberation, for equality, fights that have been waged by LGBTQ people as well. And so just to situate, you even see the profound changes in the family and the role of women in the popular culture. You contrast something like Modern Family, which is a sitcom today, with the one family is a gay parents, one is a remarried couple, you have stepchildren, you have a blended family with different nationalities mixed together. You contrast something like that with Father Knows Best or Leave It to Beaver just a couple generations ago. These are very big changes that are straining the traditional forms of patriarchy in this country.
Yet with all those changes that you've just spoken of, Sunsara, as BA says in this New Year's statement, the elimination of male supremacy is impossible within the confines of this system. And that's why it's inconceivable that this will find resolution in any other way than a radical reactionary or radical revolutionary solution. Why? Because he makes the case in this statement that we really encourage you to read, that this oppression is deeply woven into the fabric and the traditions of society, the fabric and the traditions. Think about it. It is through the patriarchal family that people acquire their most basic needs, their food, their shelter, their housing, their health care, everything. The reality is that this system relies on the patriarchal family as a key building block of a society. And this is a core reason why women cannot be truly liberated under this system. So for all the changes that capitalism has made in the position of women that Sunsara just told us about, and that's in this statement in even more depth, that combined with the struggle of women and LGBTQ people for different gender relations, and how all of this is pulling apart and changing the shape of the family, and it's challenging traditional forms of patriarchy. All of this is running straight up against the fact that this oppression cannot be ended within the framework of capitalism. And this collision is a big part of what is fueling the rage, the revanchism, the revenge of a whole section of people in this country that made up the Trump social base. And it is why their outright hatred of women has such energy in this society, and it's also why there can be no resolution to this in a positive direction outside the framework of a radically different system.
Yeah, I think this example of Trump and the Trump-Pence fascism it's important to stay on this for a minute, because it is being violently reasserted, this radically reactionary resolution being very far along in this country to the changed position of women. And this is true even when they're out of power. I mean, first of all, the fact that you had a man who openly talked about women as dogs, who publicly talked about and insulted women, talking about their menstruation cycle. I mean, this is really ugly, and bragged about sexual assault. But that's on the one side, and we shouldn't get used to it. People say, oh, that's Trump. No, this was Trump in power exactly as part of a revenge against the ways that women have gotten out of place. That's what's fueling this. And then it's coupled with Mike Pence and the Christian fascist assault on women, violent reassertion of patriarchy, which again is left over even though they're out of office. They've left this, packed the courts with Christian fascist judges. They've packed the institutions of government and state houses with these Christian fascist fanatics who, just to give one example, these people want to lock up women who have abortions. They just passed a law in Arizona. The Republican Party in Arizona passed a law that would charge women who get an abortion with murder and put them in prison. And they know this is unconstitutional, and they'll openly tell you that's the point, because they know that Trump put 3 new Supreme Court justices on the Supreme Court, and they want to challenge the constitutional right to abortion, and they think they could win that, and they well might. And this is really about slamming women backwards and enslaving women. Forcing women to have children against their will is a form of enslavement, and that's what they're vying for. It's not about babies. It's about enslavement of women, and it's exactly a way of tearing away all those changes in the role of women in the workforce, in public life. None of that is possible if women are forced to have children against their will and to submit violently again to their husbands as their husbands to the Lord.
Well, yeah, this is what we've been confronting, and we're still confronting in society. And these people are vicious, and they're fanatical, and they're lunatic. But all these examples you're giving give to life to the extreme and violent reactionary alternative that he speaks of in this statement. I recall when you were down in Washington, you went down there, left the show.
I didn't leave the show.
But you went to Washington, D.C. when Trump nominated Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court. And it just is worth saying that Amy Coney Barrett is a member, as is her husband, of a very radical, fanatical Roman Catholic sect that believes, as a core belief, that the woman must submit to her husband in all matters. And this is what also characterizes the outlook and the dictates of the Christian fascist movement that was the core base behind Trump and the core base of who you saw in front of the Capitol on January 6th, erecting their cross and their gallows with their Confederate flag. This is all of a piece. And so, yet to understand why it is not conceivable that all this will find any resolution other than in a radical reactionary direction or a radical revolutionary direction through the most, he says, extremely violent means, I just want to say a few more things about why the liberation of women can't be resolved through reforming this system. Look, if you take a look at the Democrats and their liberal progressive base, it includes many people who want to break free from the confines of traditional values and many who are breaking free from those values. You said there's all kinds of non-traditional families that exist today. But why can't there be any easier path to this? Why? Again, because all these desires for a different kind of family, for the liberation of women, are constrained within what we were talking about earlier, which is that the patriarchal family is an essential building block of this system. It's an essential economic and bedrock of a capitalist society that will continue to regenerate traditional values, even if with a somewhat new twist. And at the same time, these traditional values reinforce the system itself. Now, look, to get into this more, people are going to have to get into the statement. I'm just trying to indicate some things here. But just to give you an example here of how bedrock the family is, last week we were experiencing the true tragedies of the deep freeze that hit Texas, and people who died. There was people who had no food, they had no drinking water, and all these kinds of things that had happened to people. But if you notice this, that how people were suffering and how they would get relief, if there was any relief, or how they had to resolve this, was within the confines of their family. In other words, there was no social thing in society that was actually taking care of it, in one sense, because Texas is a more extreme expression of what is actually the norm throughout society, throughout this country. So I think this is, important for people to see just how bedrock the family is. And it's something that's just like, oh, that's how it is. But it wasn't always that way, and it doesn't always have to be that way. And just one more example of the way in which, even as the traditional values have changed and there's different mores and all this, nonetheless, this society continues to reinforce traditional values. In one way, we can also see that recently from the news is in the succession to a new president, and they start talking about what? The first family. And who? The first lady, and in this case, the first dogs. But all of this is, it's just a family and all the children, all this kind of thing. But there's a lot of traditions changed in that. And here's something that's interesting, that where you see what happens with, the new developments getting repackaged in traditional forms. With the first woman vice president, what do you do with her husband? Well, he becomes the first gentleman. So once again, you start seeing the traditional values being reasserted within the framework of what has been and what really needs to change in a radical revolutionary direction.
So I think the last thing I think we need to touch on, I've said quite a bit about the rise of a violent reactionary resolution to the changed position of women, the revenge, the hatred of women, all of this that's been unleashed by Trump, by Pence, by the hyper militant masculinity. BA talks about this in the statement as well, and that's got its foot on the accelerator and is lurching forward. And you just spoke about the way the dynamics of the system itself reinforce the patriarchal family. So that's not just a social movement of revenge, but it's regenerated and fueled by the system itself. I think it would be important for us to end with at least a little bit on the radical revolutionary resolution. So do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, we're going to be talking about an International Women's Day, and this is about a revolutionary resolution. It's an International Women's Day was started by socialists and communists, over 100 years ago, and tremendous changes were made in those first socialist revolutions, and we're going to get into that in our next episode next week. But in the statement, he goes to that radical revolutionary resolution to this question, and look, you're not going to resolve this other than through extreme means, but these extreme means can be extraordinarily liberating. And in fact, all these changes that you spoke of earlier and that he goes into in this statement lay the basis for a different kind of economic, political system, different social relations, and different ideas. But what I want to do just to indicate this, just to indicate it today for going forward through the rest of this month, is read from what's the preamble of the Constitution for a new socialist republic in North America, authored by Bob Avakian, that indicates and gives you a sense of what we're aiming for. And this is the Constitution for the day after the revolution. So let me just read this. The oppression of women arose together with the emergence of exploitive class divisions among human beings thousands of years ago, and has been carried forward and become deeply entrenched in all societies ruled by exploiting classes, and was a marked feature of the imperialist United States of America and its domination and influence in the world. Abolishing and uprooting all of this is one of the most important objectives of the new socialist republic in North America. This is expressed not only in full legal equality between women and men, but beyond that, the declared orientation and policy of this republic to overcome all tradition's chains embodied in traditional gender roles and divisions, and all oppressive relations bound up with this in every sphere of society, and to enable women as fully as men to take part in and contribute to every aspect of the struggle to transform society and the world in order to abolish all relations of oppression and exploitation and the emancipation of humanity as a whole. So that is a radically different vision than what exists today, and that's what we're aiming for here on the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. So we're going to be celebrating that this month, so let's talk a little bit about International Women's Day, March 8th, 2021.
So International Women's Day this year, March 8th, falls on a Monday. And so we're going to be marking the entire weekend leading up to and then Monday itself as part of the revolutionary celebration of International Women's Day. We're going to start across this country, and you're invited to be part of this, with really getting out to the masses with this question of breaking the chains on women. On Saturday, March 6th, all over the country, we're going to have, yes, in socially distanced and best practices ways, we're going to have car caravans, people putting up posters, raising the demand of International Women's Day, the slogan, break the chains, unleash the fury of women as a mighty force for revolution, and spreading the statement, the New Year's statement from Bob Avakian and other things around this question, really stirring the air, street theater, other ways that are very creative to make this a mass social question and to build the movement for revolution in this way. And part of that will also be inviting people in to a virtual celebration that we'll be hosting on this channel, the RevComs on YouTube, on Sunday, March 7th, which will be a celebration of International Women's Day. People should dial in, log in, bring your friends, spread the word, and we'll be highlighting the struggle of women around the world. We'll be sharing some of the really compelling and visceral speeches from Bob Avakian dealing with this question, and we'll find other ways to mark this. That'll be a nationwide and maybe international celebration online on this channel on Sunday, and then on Monday, on International Women's Day itself, we're going to have different kinds of political actions around the country to mark this as a revolutionary holiday. And so all of this, we want to invite you to be part of. You can please be checking the website, revcom.us. There'll be more announcements on this as things go, including the posters will be available. or write to us at getorganizedforrevolutiontour@gmail.com to get hooked up with plans in your area. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, we've mentioned it before, we're going to be doing special segments on this question of breaking the chains on women through the next several episodes in March of this show. And in all the activities that we're doing around International Women's Day, out on the streets and online in different ways, we want to be really driving people to watch this show. It comes out every Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, and we're going to be dealing with this question of the liberation of women and really all the burning questions of the revolution, the burning questions facing humanity. We have to grow the audience. And this is going to be a really important way of building this movement for revolution. So that's a full menu. We want to invite you into it, and we'll be, again, watch the website, revcom.us. In Bob Avakian's New Year's statement, a new year, the urgent need for a radically new world, for the emancipation of all humanity, he writes in part, "It is true that the Trump-Pence regime and others like it, for example, Bolsonaro in Brazil, has made the environmental crisis far worse. But the dynamics and requirements of this system are driving the climate crisis towards the point of no return, regardless of which particular person or regime is its dominant political representative."
In this same New Year's statement, Bob Avakian lays bare the stakes of this unprecedented juncture. In essential terms, time is not on the side of the struggle for a better future for humanity. So the time there is must not be squandered, mired in oblivious individualism and political paralysis, or misspent on misdirected activity that only reinforces this system, which perpetuates endless horrors for the masses of humanity and has brought things to the brink of very real catastrophe. And with this in mind, let's look at the problem of global warming and the larger environmental emergency.
The last 7 years have been the warmest on the planet since the beginning of modern record-keeping nearly 150 years ago. The science of global warming has been clear, definitive, and compelling. The cause of this warming is heat being trapped close to the surface of the Earth. The main reason for this is the massive, large-scale burning of fossil fuels, oil, natural gas, coal, which releases carbon dioxide. This carbon dioxide traps heat and prevents it from leaving the atmosphere. This scientific understanding has been well known and amply documented since 1988. Yet more than half the carbon pumped into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution, beginning in the 1700s, has accumulated in the 30 years since this scientific fact was established. It is now 5 years since the signing of the so-called Paris Climate Agreement by the governments of the world. This was supposed to curb carbon emissions and shift away from fossil fuels, even though the goals were meager. But not one major power, not one of the major capitalist imperialist powers like the US, China, Russia, France, has come close to meeting the targets of the Paris Agreement. The US is responsible for more of the accumulated carbon in the atmosphere than any other country in the world. Under the liberal Obama administration, the US became the largest oil producer in the world and saw a boom in the extremely destructive practice of natural gas fracking. 4 years of fascist rule saw an all-out effort to remove any and all protections of the water, air, and the earth.
All all of this with the global warming and that, and a lot of it's a hoax. It's a hoax. I mean, it's a money maker.
The extraction and burning of fossil fuels were full speed ahead. Here's a basic truth. Fossil fuels are highly profitable. They are deeply embedded in the electrical grids, the transport systems, the global manufacturing supply chains of imperialism, and its food production systems. The genocidal military of the US empire is the largest institutional user of fossil fuels in the world, powering America's warships, warplanes, and tanks in its military bases and transport. For all the hype that we have entered a new era of solar and wind power, the reality is this: oil, natural gas, and coal still provide 80% of global energy. And the planet gets hotter. Scientists estimate we are close to a point of no return, where runaway warming of the planet cannot be controlled or rolled back in any way, with large sections of the planet likely becoming uninhabitable. The effects of global warming are accelerating and widening in their devastation, far worse than scientists' early predictions. Arctic sea ice is melting at ever faster rates. The oceans are getting warmer, threatening coral reefs, marine ecosystems, and global fish habitat. Sea levels are rising, threatening to flood huge expanses of the planet, especially low-lying coastal countries like Bangladesh. Glaciers are melting, putting the planet's water supplies at risk for billions of people. The world is seeing an increase in droughts, wildfires, blistering heat waves, and extreme weather events, especially tropical cyclones and hurricanes. In the US alone, weather veers from California wildfires in the summer to polar freezes in the Midwest and Texas, like we have now. Global warming of the planet as a whole does not mean that all places in the world are going to get uniformly warmer. Some places like the east coast of the US are going to get much colder, and polar freezes are going to increase in frequency. Some 25 million people, mainly from the oppressed countries of the third world like in Africa and Latin America, have already become climate refugees, fleeing flooded coastal areas, parched agricultural lands, ruined rural economies, and conditions of rising heat that spread disease more easily. As global warming intensifies, the numbers of climate refugees, again mainly from poor countries, are likely to climb to the hundreds of millions. Global warming and its impact on people, economies, and natural resources increases the potential for local and regional conflicts and wars, which cause even more destruction of the environment. This is catastrophic, but there is no radical rethinking of how we produce the means of life and interact with the natural world. No bold action at the highest levels of governance. To understand why, we have to heed Bob Avakian's call in his New Year's statement for people to take up and apply science, based on evidence, going beneath the surface to understand the underlying dynamics and workings of reality. We have to apply science not only to the processes of nature, such as the COVID pandemic and global warming, but to human society as well. Let's apply science towards understanding key features of the system we live under, the capitalist-imperialist system. Under capitalism, what gets produced and how it is produced, whether it's housing, computers, medicine, or energy, is motivated and measured by profit. This profit comes from the exploitation of billions of human beings on this planet. Capitalism has grown, expanded, and prospered by plundering nature as an endless supply of resources to pour into production for profit. Capitalism has grown, expanded, and prospered by turning nature into a cost-free dumping ground for carbon emissions, industrial waste, garbage, and agricultural runoff. The Earth's capacity to withstand this is reaching its limits, but capitalism doesn't care about or respect those limits. Capitalist production is driven forward by the commandment, expand or die. Competition runs through this whole system. The key way individual capitalists gain competitive advantage and get a bigger share of the market than their competitors is to cheapen costs by exploiting people more ruthlessly around the world, with no concern for spending money to protect the environment or the health and safety of the people. Capitalists are compelled to be ruthless because they are in competition with others who will undercut them. And this same competitive dynamic takes place between capitalist imperialist countries. For example, the US has waged wars to maintain its control of the oil-rich Middle East in order to exert control over the world economy. Under this system of capitalism-imperialism, expansion and the quest for greater profitability are not a matter of choice or personal greed. If individual capitalists don't invest and expand and keep accumulating profit and more profit, they can't stay in the game and compete. Capitalism-imperialism does not and cannot interact with the environment in a sustainable and rational way. For example, Apple doesn't weigh the long-term effects of its globally outsourced production of Macs, of iPhones on the environment, like the air pollution its subcontractors in China cause, or the depletion of resources of the planet, or cost to society by the damage done to the health of humanity, like the lung disease children working in cobalt mines in the Congo suffer. Apple's metric is the bottom line of profit. Environmental considerations are an externality and hindrance to this bottom line. Capitalism cannot treat nature or natural resources in a sustainable way or take the long view. There is no society-wide planning for human need and for the protection of the planet. In this light, consider the Biden presidency. Biden, the Democrats, other imperialist world leaders, and corporate CEOs say they are going to cut carbon emissions by 2050. But what they don't say is that their plan to do this depends on technology not yet proven, along with various pricing and tax schemes. And even what they promise is not nearly enough to reverse the climate crisis. This is not the radical and rapid transition away from fossil fuels that is needed. And at this late hour of environmental crisis, for people to pin hopes and pour energies into Biden's environmental program is to do precisely what Bob Avakian warns against in his New Year's statement: to squander time on misdirected activity that only reinforces this system. Here's the stark but liberating truth. We have two choices: to let humanity and the planet hurtle uncontrollably towards environmental disaster and other horrors, or make an actual revolution to overthrow this system and on the basis of a radically different economy, go to work on addressing this crisis.
Obviously, we have only one Earth as a home for humanity. And this climate crisis can only be fundamentally and ultimately addressed on a world scale. But a first great step or leap can be taken by wresting power from the capitalist imperialist system in its most powerful stronghold and making this a source of inspiration and base of support for people around the world in rising up to overthrow and abolish all systems and relations of exploitation, oppression, plunder, and destruction of the environment and of human beings who can only continue to exist and to thrive through a rational and planned interaction with the rest of nature.
So that segment on the environment ended with a short clip from Bob Avakian's speech, why we need an actual revolution and how we could really make revolution. This speech is available on revcom.us, and it is the strategy for an actual revolution, the basis for it, the strategy for it, and what it's going to be for. So I encourage you to go on revcom.us or to our YouTube channel and watch that full film. And that segment on the environment ended with this. It said we have two choices: to let humanity and the planet hurtle uncontrollably towards environmental disaster and other horrors, or make an actual revolution to overthrow this system on the basis of a radically different economy, go to work on addressing this ecological crisis. So with that, this wraps up today's show, Sunsara. And
Well, final words before we send you off. Listen, if you want a different world, if you want humanity to get free, you need to watch this show every week. You need to go on this journey with us. If you haven't yet subscribed to our channel, hit the notification button and watch as we go forward, and let your friends know. Spread the word. We need to grow the audience of this show. We need to wake people up and get organized for an actual revolution. As we cited from BA's New Year's statement, time is not on the side of the struggle for a better world, but we have to go to work on that, and this show is a key vehicle for that. The final thing I want to ask you to do is to become a Patreon to support this show. Go to patreon.com/therevcoms. Sign up for whatever level works for you. $3 a month, $15 a month, $200 a month. Whatever you can give to support this show, to spread this show, and definitely we will see you next week.
so good night from both of us and the RNL Revolution Nothing Less crew. We'll see you next week and every Thursday night.